Well, the U.S. Senate has advanced a sweeping Russia sanctions bill named for the late Senator Lindsey Graham, who championed the legislation before his death. The procedural vote passed 86 to 12 hours after Graham's funeral service in Washington, which Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also attended. The bill aims to increase economic pressure on Russia over its war in Ukraine by targeting buyers of Russian oil. India, China, Slovakia, Hungary and Azerbaijan face the risk of tariffs of up to 100% under the proposed legislation. India is the second largest buyer of Russian crude oil after China. The bill now moves towards further votes before it can become a law. So, Brian, this is something that can pose to be dangerous for India as US is looking to impose 100% sanctions on Russia, looking at the Ukraine war.
Definitely, the U.S. Senate is now set to vote on a key procedural motion on a sweeping Russian sanction bill that could have major implications for countries importing large volumes of Russian oil. That even includes India and also China. The legislation aims to increase economic pressure also on Moscow over Ukraine war by giving U.S. President Trump the authority to impose tariffs of up to 100% on nations that continue purchasing significant quantities of Russian oil, rather energy. And India has also emerged as one of Russia's biggest crude oil buyers since Ukraine conflict that began in 2022, taking advantage of discounted price. Now, if this bill eventually becomes law and tariffs are imposed, it could complicate India's energy imports, refinery operations, and broader trade ties with the U.S. However, also there was yesterday's vote is only a procedural step. The bill must clear both the Senate and also the House of Representatives before reaching
all
the
right.
Trump.
Thank you so much, Brian, for all that information. Also joining us on the broadcast is Ambassador Sushil Kumar Singhal, who's a former diplomat. Thank you so much, sir, for your time and for speaking to NewsX. A very good morning to you, sir. Ambassador, I want to understand from your perspective how this will play out for India, which is already facing a lot of sanctions, then the easing of sanctions, another now bill that actually looks at sanctioning Russia. However, India, being the second largest importer of Russian oil, may be affected.
Shivani, the thing is that, this is a development which I think the Indian policymakers have to look at it very carefully. Though it is in a bit of a distance, there's only the procedural vote which has passed, that has 2-3 stages more. And after that, also, it is only gives the discretion to the President Trump to impose sanctions up to 100%. So there are lots of, area for diplomacy and negotiations if it becomes law. One, but India has to, as I said at the beginning, has to examine all its options because India always believes India's foreign policy is always based on the principle of strategic autonomy, that we never like to be dictated by any country how to conduct our relations with others. We conduct relations with every country on its own merit and in our interest. So based on that, I think India will engage with USA, with the US present administration, have discussion, and will try to get, I think, special approval, or they will carve out an exception for India as they have been doing earlier, because India is the one country which helped President Trump and previous administration in stabilizing the global oil prices, and which has become even more important in the present scenario when this Iran issue is not seeing the end, it's still continuing, and it's still nobody is able to figure out how it will end up. So that has, has impact on the oil prices. So India has, I think, a lot of options. Of course, India is diversifying its requirement, sourcing also. Already about 30 odd countries are exporting to India this crude oil. But apart from that, I think they will have a lot of room to play in this. because US also is dependent on certain things on India, and they always been, sort of behind the scenes supportive of the India's import of the Russian oil. Of course, they don't admit that openly. So what I see is a lot of, negotiations will take place because remember, we also have this trade agreement which is hanging still and it's not finalized. So if this becomes law, it will have implications on on the trade agreement also, which the President Trump himself is very keen to conclude. So what I'm trying to say here is there is a lot of variables which both sides, India as well as US, have to take into account before they move on in this direction. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your perspective on this issue. Let me also get in a word from Dr. Sharath Kohli, who is a senior economist, who's also joined us on this broadcast. Dr. Kohli, thank you so much. A very good morning to you. However, we are again looking at this sanctions and tariffs game resuming now. How are you looking at India being impacted by this new Russia sanctions bill?
Good morning, Shivani, to you and the viewers. Extremely objectionable, I must say. In the midst of India-US trade deal talks, which have now been happening for a very long time, several rounds, we've even lost the count of how many rounds of discussions have happened in the last year and a quarter, I would say. So many rounds, the American delegation coming here, the Indian delegation going there from the Commerce Ministry. And just as we were close to the deal, when the additional tariffs under Section 301B of the US Trade Act 1974 levied at 10%, India was put on a lower scale of, instead of 12.5%, 10%, although even that was objectionable because the reason why those tariffs were imposed was because of the forced labor, which probably they accused that India was using because of some imported products from China being used in the products being exported to America. So that anyway was objectionable for the reason the tariff rate was still okay. We were quite competitive as far as other countries are concerned. But in the midst of all that, this 100% move by the bipartisan group in Senate to put India in 100% tariff category because India is exporting 34% of the Russian oil. And it's very strange because what they said is that if a country is exporting less than 15% of the Russian oil, then it's fine. But a country which is exporting 34% of the oil, they'll be 100% tariff. So I just fail to understand what kind of logic is this? How does the quantum matter? Because whether you are importing or not importing is what should matter. And it was President Trump himself that when the crude oil prices had crossed $100, he himself said, okay, fine, I remove these sanctions, it's okay for India to import. So I think this is extremely arbitrary, Shivani, that you levy tariffs at your convenience, using tariffs as a weapon against countries. And I think this is something which India will definitely not accept. And this is going to not go very well, Shivani, as far as the India-US trade deal is concerned. It will dampen the whole relations between India and US, which have been there for decades now. India-US relations go far beyond tariffs. In terms of defense, technology, people to people, probably every Indian household in metro cities or tier 2 cities has some of the other relatives staying in the US, such a heavy population of Indian PIOs, expats over there, and so much of contribution of India's to the US economy. Hypothetically speaking, Shivani, if for a moment, by a magical power, if you remove Indians and PIOs from US, I can guarantee you that US will come to a standstill. So extremely objectionable, and I hope this bill in Senate falls and it's not voted to be implemented, Shivani.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kohli, for your valuable perspective on